Well, thank you very much for your time, Graeme. Just for a bit of context, I thought I'd introduce myself so people know who I am. My name's Catie, and I've been working with Kiwa Catchment Land Care to document the changes that have happened on the land and with the people who've been part of the Road to Regenerative Agriculture program. So we'd love to hear from you and your reflections on the program, and also a bit about your expertise and why you do what you do. So welcome, Graeme.
Great, thanks, Catie. Good to meet you. I'd also like to thank the Care Catchment Group. It's been a fantastic project. Really has made a big difference. So just a bit of my background. I trained as an industrial chemist, and then moved off into agriculture. After working in London, I keep saying there's nothing like 7 years in London to drive you back to the farmland. I just started trying to use that sort of what I'd learned working in corporates on agriculture, and I thought, it won't take me long, but it did take me a long time. Just sort of working on the cause of problems and weeds and the whole thing, and ended up going down the regenerative ag sort of pathways. So it was really, started, I saw some changes and I couldn't understand them, and they were in conflict with the current agriculture, where sort of more is more, and I was seeing less is more. And then sort of really started to understand that sort of that the land and land health is the foundation of agriculture, and sort of people and money are nested within that healthy land. And the only way you can get that to work is if you're continually increasing the land health. And I use some monitoring techniques and CSIRO science. So that science background, I chased down sort of all this and ended up going over and training with Alan Savory in holistic management in 1996. Came back from that, and we were having kids, and didn't have a lot of money and all that sort of stuff. And so I had a corporate career and worked in a lot of things and stuff. And we decided that it was sort of pretty important that we focus on how do we produce food while we increase biodiversity. So that's really how we got started. So.
Quite an interesting history you've had there. And have you farmed yourself?
Yeah, so I think what I always tried to make it work before I'd go and talk to farmers. So I had this problem with people that can read books, then go and try and talk practically to people, and you can't. So we typically had cattle, had sheep for a while. Never really interested, dabbled in cropping, never really interested. So really just a real focus on grazing and grasslands. Ended up sort of managing Stipa Native Grasses, which is the Native Grass Association Australia-wide. All those sort of things, working in lots of not-for-profits. So that sort of work, which we think is the most important that we can do. And it wasn't really until I'd had children that I realised that the future sort of is the next generation, not your generation. So it taught me very quickly, sort of thing, that if our children and their children and their children are going to have a future, we've got to stop producing food that destroys biodiversity. So so that was sort of the initial interest. So.
Yeah, I think having kids is the tipping point for a lot of people. It's a tangible expression of hope for the future.
Yeah,
and then
for sure.
Well, how we're going to steward this future.
Yeah, so.
I'm interested personally on getting clear on the correct terminology. Do you call it regenerative grazing, holistic management, cell grazing? There seems to be a host of different names. I'd love to hear how you phrase them.
And there is a lot of names, and there always will be. People want it to all be squashed into one thing, and it never will be. It's in the complex domain, so there's always competing hypotheses of what's the right thing to do. So my focus is how do you apply grazing animals to the land that you increase landscape function and biodiversity. So I've been trying to get people to describe it in terms of the outcome rather than as a brand. So I've been saying that what I teach people is landscape function grazing. So if you don't increase the landscape function every day, you don't start to improve the soil health. So landscape function was developed by David Tongway and Norm Hindley in the 90s, 80s and 90s for CSIRO. And they developed a monitoring technique that you can actually measure the soil surface. And from that, you can predict, is the land going to be stable or erode? Is the water going to infiltrate or run off? And are you going to get nutrient cycling or nothing happening? So that's the foundation, because as farmers, we manage the soil surface. Everyone wants to look at everything except the soil surface. Digging, we want to dig in the soil, and people argue with me, oh, Graeme, why don't we do it as well? I'm like, oh, well, you can do it. It's just no point. We know what's happening because we can assess the soil surface. So just some of those things. And the earliest warning indicator of whether the land's getting better or worse and how to read the landscape is actually looking at the soil surface and seeing what's happening there.
And who are you predominantly working with? Are these massive broadacre farms, small holdings? Who are your clients?
Yeah, so mainly I had a webinar this morning and they were all big landholders. But then the night before, so last night, I had small landholders. I lived in the Huon Valley for a couple of years and got a lot more small landholders, but also worked up through the Midlands and up into the northwest of Tasmania with bigger holdings. So there really is no size that this applies to. All land needs to be managed for increasing landscape function and biodiversity. It doesn't matter if it's cropping, forestry, horticulture, grazing. All of it needs to be managed for increasing landscape function.
Okay, so any of us with our feet on the ground are probably in need of some of this training and mentorship.
Definitely.
And what are the benefits that you see in this?
So you'll like this. I've been working with the Drought Hub in Tasmania, and I say I've developed drought-proof grazing, and you can almost feel like they also want to ask me, hey, have you got a perpetual motion machine as well, Graeme? They're very skeptical. So I have to get in front of them on Zoom or in person and actually explain how we do that. So you can make the soil healthier as you manage it. It's a different focus, though. Conventional agriculture focuses on increasing production, and I focus on increasing profit. Because when you look at the data, it's very clear that the declining terms of trade are caused by the cost of inputs. So how do you switch that around? And how do you lower risk? So risk is going up. So the big risks in agriculture are debt, rainfall or seasonal risk, and market price. And how do you manage? So you're increasing landscape function, you're doing it in a low risk way, and the people, the farmer well-being's going up. So that's my focus. So that triple bottom line there. So
it's quite amazing to me that the focus wouldn't be profit.
Yeah, well, so you need to talk to a university or Department of Ag. It will be production, and then they're assuming that from production through to profit. And it doesn't work because most people are in the high rainfall zone are overstocked. The cropping people are overcropping. They're cropping areas that aren't profitable, like the sand hills and things like that, which is the group I was talking to this morning. And everyone always pushes things too hard in chasing and at too high an intensity. And then that exposes you to higher debt, rainfall and market price risk. So it's profit over time, not profit just today. So, But the agriculture is really fighting back, so which I think is really interesting. So I must be getting onto their radar, I suppose.
This is good news from the world of agriculture. So before we talk about the Road to Regen program specifically, I'd love for you to paint a bit of a picture for people listening who might want a concrete or tangible example of what you're talking about. What does this look like in practice on a farm? You know, you can give any kind of case study, a snippet, but just to really anchor us in what this means.
So what does it mean? It means that your focus is on the land. So if it's a grazing system, if we just stick to that, then your focus is on the perennial grass. And has the perennial grass fully recovered before you put the animals into the area to graze it? So I've got a clear definition, photo standards. So it looks like an ungrazed plant and contains fresh yellow litter in its base. You then graze it at high density and high plant utilisation so that you put that litter onto the ground, which becomes sheet composting between the grasses and refreshes the grasses. So, so we've been doing a lot of research with Sydney University and stuff. So we know that that management over long recoveries, high stock densities, very, very high inconvenient stock density, and really deep plant utilisation, which is tough on the general population of the animals, is what really rapidly restores the land. So I've been showing people videos because they actually don't know what's possible. So I've got one of a guy called Benjamin Sale from he's a Frenchman that's working in Somaliland in the Horn of Africa. And he did one of these trials that I get people to do. I call them safe to fail. So I pinched that from a man named Dave Snowden, who really understands complexity. And I just get people to do a small area. Don't try and do a big area, just a small area to see if it works. And it went from desert in Somaliland to full perennial grassland in 12 months. The recovery is incredibly quick. I'm not stressed at all about knowing what to do so that we can restore the planet. What I am stressed about is everyone not looking and not watching that. That's the problem. So I think it's a great story. It's fantastic. You know, the videos from the Road to Regenerative Agriculture, they're incredibly inspiring. You know, no one else is doing that anywhere in the world. And I go, wow, it just doesn't get out though. So we need to be really sort of doing our own trials. Typically, we relied on trials from the DPI or the Departments of Ag, but they're still focusing on production and declining and ends up declining in soil health and biodiversity. So, and I can tell people very, very quickly if they're regenerative or not. There's a lot of people, say they're regenerative. And I just say your paddocks will be better than your roadside. If you're regenerative, your paddocks will be better than your roadside. And you can see everyone, they almost blanch because they go, oh, they can immediately picture it that their roadside's better. And so our whole explanation of what we do is that proper management will make the land healthier and more biodiverse. If it's not better than your unmanaged roadside, then you're kidding yourself. So, yeah, so it's a matter of trialing, it's a matter of correct infrastructure, trying to have infrastructure that's easy to automate, and then selecting and breeding animals that thrive under that management. As a species, I think we've always, as we've started to farm and graze animals, we've modified the land for the animals. Now we have to be chasing that back and modifying the animals for the land because we know what the land needs to thrive.
Thank you for redefining regenerative and giving us a concrete example, roadsides, flourishing, because the way I see it at the moment is people call, cups of tea regenerative.
Yeah. So the paddocks have got to be better than the roadsides. So.
Yeah, brilliant. And these changes, you mentioned infrastructure and also the human element, the human behavioural changes, are these hard?
Um, they are, I think, if you go about it the wrong ways. So, again, I'm borrowing heavily from Alan Savory and Dave Snowden, who are probably the leaders in the world on complexity understanding and how to actually put it into practice and managing for complexity. So the key is to go for action-based change rather than language-based change, Dave Snowden will say. Or another guy, Jerry Stern, and he has this, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than think your way into a new way of acting. And what we do is we sit around and try to think it through, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that's again back to that example of Benjamin at Somaliland. No one I have met predicted that. And I go, if you'd sat around and tried to think this through, you wouldn't have done it, but you've got to act. So once you do that, a lot of the talk that I hear about, mindset change and all that sort of stuff just disappears because people know what to do. So the safe to fail trial is the key to initiating and getting change happening. And a lot of the time, and that's very quick. So, with the Kiowa Landcare Group project, that was where we went. We had that, we had a workshop. How do you put in a safe to fail trial? Just a tiny little bit of knowledge. It's not a big requirement. You just need to know how to put in that trial. Then you see the animals. Then you learn the next step. I think I and others have spent too much of our lives trying to download into people. We need, I always wanted to have a USB port on their heads so I could transfer, but you only need to stage this through, and it's about action-based change, not language-based change. So you can't talk about it, you've got to do it. And that's why this is the success of the Kiowa Landcare Group is an order of magnitude better than the industry standard. So, a lot of groups that are training, they're getting less than 5% of the people they train being successful. But success is increasing landscape function and biodiversity, increasing low risk profit, and improving the land manager's well-being. So if you use that, the success is less than 5%. Whereas this is well over 50%. So it is an order of magnitude. So it's extraordinary good news. And it really happens very quickly. I'm glad you've seen it and been there, Catie. So, those people were competent, very capable. I'd also like to thank Megan Hughes, who selected the people through the expressions of interest and stuff. She knew which people, because we were talking about it when we were doing it. We wanted to leave people that could help others in the community, so champions of it. And some of them are very small landholders and things like that, but they actually did it and know what it takes. So, so it's good.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the program now. And those 6 participants, all very, very different, as you mentioned, some incredibly small, Chantel and William on 10 acres, Donna with her horse agistment, so many different arrangements. What did you find in the program? How did it go for you?
Yeah, well, really, because it was sort of COVID bound, so it was really unusual. I've been sort of trying to solve this. How do we give people the ability and the confidence and stuff for quite a while? So we started I got funded from Holistic Management International to run a mentoring program and try and work out how to do this. So I started with monthly webinars, and each month it was like starting again. So that didn't work. So I went to fortnightly and weekly, and that step change improvement. But also then incorporating that frequency of the webinars with the safe to fail trials, with that ongoing support, it worked really well. So, not everyone could get there to every meeting and things like that, but we spend a fair bit of time discussing what works really well about those things is getting people to send in photos and questions and stuff, and then we use that as the discussion and the training. And that changes the whole thing from me squawking about sort of something on a PowerPoint to discussing with people. I think Zoom webinars should be banned and everything should be a Zoom meeting. The only way people learn is to sort of say, and you go, well, what do you mean, Chantal? What does that face mean? And then it's like a discussion. So rather than a lecture, it's got to be more like a discussion. So, they were incredibly engaged, really keen to learn. They sort of skeptical, which was great. So, so I loved all that sort of stuff. I love, being, skeptical without the cynicism. So, so they were just, a really great group. So.
Yeah, such wonderful people. And they did mention to me that accountability, that camaraderie of the group made a huge difference. And I'm interested to hear from you what were some of the standout changes that you observed?
Oh, like everyone, so everyone that did the grazing all increased the landscape function massively. So they knew what the target was, they knew what they did. I put some boundaries on so that we got really good answers in the first year. I'd be sort of recommending that people watch the videos and just see the change in the land and the confidence. And it's easy to understand, but it's not convenient to shift the animals in a way that restores landscape function and biodiversity. So mostly though, if you can sort of stick at it and see the benefits, people then push through that sort of to getting animals that are more suited, and also sort of starting to think about, is there ways of automating this, which is what, so I work in South America and the US, and done a fair bit of work in Mongolia as well. So it's, if the people aren't with the animals all the time every day, then you really need to start sort of working out how do you make this convenient. So, but it takes, as a minimum, it takes daily moves. So, you need fencing that fits that. I've got this thing at one of the farmers I work with, Stephen Hobbs in Coniva. I go, I really like it, Stephen, because you make me that frustrated. You make me really clear. And I yelled at him on one of the things, stop subdividing paddocks. It's never going to work. So I go, you'll be 1,000 years old before you have enough paddocks. So you've got to actually start changing the way you're thinking about this. It's more about building strips. It's more about flexible water, flexible fencing, flexible sub-paddocks and sub-paddock size. So there's quite a lot to it. It's all very doable, and it falls out as people are going.
Yeah, well, potentially, some of us have moved more to a home-based lifestyle and economy, perhaps through the pandemic and into the future, and a lot of relocalization happening and people returning to the home. So maybe there is an opportunity there for those things to run in parallel.
So for commercial scale farmers, it's sort of the automating works really well. So we just work on sort of using bat latches, or there's other fence lifting things so that the animals shift themselves on a timer, and that works really well. But it's all very doable, but it's a bit confusing. So I have this thing about saying to people, when they say something to me, I go, well, you've been on YouTube unsupervised, I can tell. So trying to get, there's really two clear schools of thought, on how to graze. And I'm going, well, trial both of them. I go, this one's the one I found to work, but trial both. Put a safe to fail trial in on that and a safe to fail trial in that and see which one works for you. So it's that sort of thinking. So,
yeah. Great. So if there are people watching, farmers, wannabe farmers, homesteaders, what do you say to people who are interested in what they're hearing and considering participating if there's a next round, this kind of mentorship or and training, or implementing some of these changes themselves? What do you share as advice?
Well, what I've been saying to people is I've been sending them videos of the management required and the changes. So I have this real thing that I've signed up for things that didn't turn out to be what I was expecting. So so I try and make it really clear. So I usually say, look at the different ones, look at how they're managing. And and a lot of them sound really good, but the thing that works in the long run is frequent moves, daily moves with long recoveries, generally longer than 12 months in most areas. So you need to be thinking about, what does that mean? In the high rainfall zone, all the stocking rates are too high, just those sort of things. But then do look-see. So I run a mentoring program for people, so they could look at that. But I just think that we need to get on and really make sure, this is beyond reasonable doubt. As sort of, in 12 months, they made incredible changes to their land. But was it easy? No. Chantal was, I'm not sure we can keep doing this. And, and how do I do that? And some of the issues along the way. But it's beyond reasonable doubt that this is an incredibly viable alternative that restores land health and biodiversity. So to me, there is no other option, because the current agriculture doesn't work. It's only got declining terms of trade, and it's reducing biodiversity. So I don't understand what you're fighting for. It's not as though it's winning for you. So so the hopes for the future. So I have this thing that, the energy and time required to change the universities and the departments of ags is too high for me. So what I'm focusing on is trying to get about 20% of all farmers successful at regenerative ag, and then it'll flip itself. Then the universities will listen. Then the department of ags change. So you can't address it. I've worked with Sydney University, Melbourne University, Victorian DPI. I've been through all that. It doesn't work. What you have to do is change the farmers. So when the farmers say, what can we do? I go, you've got to be successful at this. Because you've got to be part of the 20%, part of the push. And I have a real thing. So when I was working with the group, I was trying to do it at the train the trainer level. So to lead the champions in the community, but they go, we don't like this slide or something. And I'd say, that's good. Can you come up with a new one? So it's not all me. I'm just about retired. Everyone has got to pick it up and run with it and really work out, it's all right to say, I want to be, sort of green and things like that, but you've got to start producing food that restores biodiversity.
Well, sometimes I worry that kind of sense doesn't penetrate. it's too logical. And 20%, it does sound, it sounds manageable, reasonable, and that's true. It's grassroots stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's the next thing.
Once that happens, then it all switches. So
fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Graeme. I'm wondering if you have any additional reflections or things we haven't touched on that you'd like to.
I can't think of anything. But I'd strongly recommend sort of doing some searching on YouTube and comparing the differences, and then going and trialing them yourself. And it's usually got to be done at high density, high utilisation, and greater than 12 months recovery, and just see what happens to your place. So we see bare ground go back to dense perennial grassland with high landscape function. So that'd be the only recommendation.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, but also over the course of the program. I think you've been a pretty inspiring sounding board for all of the farms. And yeah, it's been so amazing to watch that unfold. So thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Catie.